This production of Euripides' Orestes was the initiative of the Oxford Ancient Languages Society, which is a student group at Oxford, a collection of students and academics, devoted to promoting the engagement with and study of ancient languages. Well, certainly would be the case.
It's a very interesting and exciting group of people. We speak ancient languages, which are very mainly Latin and ancient Greek. The more you practice a language and the more you think about the vocabulary you're going to use, and the more you can understand the texts.
And for a long time now, we've been wanting to stage a production of an ancient drama. It's a wonderful way to engage with the ancient texts in line with many of our goals. We're always looking for ways to hear these ancient languages spoken and to speak them ourselves and to get really inside these texts and immerse ourselves in them. And of course, as actors, learning all these lines and speaking them on stage, inhabiting the characters, it's a really good way of deepening our interaction with these texts, really internalizing them. And for the audience, to hear them spoken, on the one hand, it's a great pedagogical experience for the language to hear the words spoken and see them acted out on stage, and also to really experience the whole thing together. I mean, to get an immersive experience of these texts on the stage is something we've been really keen to do. For a long time, we weren't sure exactly how to approach it, which play to choose. There are so many to choose from. There are tragedies and comedies, Greek and Latin even. And it's, of course, a big endeavor to undertake. So we stalled for a while. And finally, a few of us in a deserted restaurant in rural Bulgaria decided just to go for it. And we made the decision to go for Euripides' Orestes. Now, Euripides' Orestes is not the most typical of ancient tragedies, and perhaps not the most profound, but it is extremely interesting, extremely skillful and intricate, and extremely appropriate, I think, for this kind of endeavor. One very important reason is the music. Now, we know that ancient tragedies were highly musical affairs. It's even in the name. The odi, the oidia, means song. And we know that the lyric meters of tragedy were accompanied by the aulos, the ancient double pipe of two reeds, and that this was clearly an important part of what it was to perform an ancient tragedy and to listen to it. We know very little about the music of Aeschylus and Sophocles, the first two of the three great tragedians, whose works have survived with complete plays in their entirety. We know a little from Testimonia, but we have no surviving melodies, and really our knowledge is quite thin. Now, even Euripides, our knowledge of his music is quite thin too, but there is more. We have, for instance, for the Orestes in particular, because it was such a popular play in antiquity, one of the most popular of all ancient tragedies, we have some indications about how it might have been sung. We even have a papyrus fragment from Egypt that was written in about 200 BC and contains a few lines of the second chorus of the play with ancient musical notation, which we can understand. And many scholars think that this melody might even have been Euripides' own, and scholarly work has been done to reconstruct a plausible melody for the whole chorus. We also have some ancient descriptions of the music. For instance, the grammarian Dionysius of Halicarnassus describes some of the details of the opening of the first chorus, how the melody went, he says that in the first three notes, the first four notes, I think, the melody stays flat on one note. And so he describes how the melody differs from the verbal accent. And so we could use some of that, presuming that he was thinking of Euripides' original music, which it may not have been, but at least some music that was current in antiquity for this play. We could use that to gain information about Euripides' music. We have ancient testimonia describing aspects of Euripides' style and some ancient parodies or references in contemporary literature. So for the music, we have something to go on, and that's very exciting, because one of our key aims in this was to bring to life a full musical production with the aulos, with a full musical score. So a few things made this production possible. On the one hand, we have our brilliant community in Oxford of the Ancient Languages Society, so lots of people to draw on who are really keen about ancient languages, can speak in ancient Greek already, and are very willing to learn lines and act brilliantly. Crucially, also, we have Callum Armstrong, our wonderful aulit, who is a really virtuosic performer and specialist in this instrument. There are very few in the world. He is one of the few and, of course, one of the best, and it was a real privilege to work with him.
It was absolutely wonderful working with Callum. He brought so much expertise to the project, not just in terms of like sort of historical knowledge, but also in terms of musical sensitivity and what we could do. For example, in Euripides' day, we think that they would have used quarter tones. Those are tones between the smallest step of Western scales, which is the semitone.
Wait, you've got these quarter tones, right?
Yeah.
Don't be scared of the quarter tones. The quarter tones are the interesting bit,
Yeah.
right? So the quarter tones need to be stressed, yeah? And it's also a very nice way to sort of propel yourself up. So,
But a really interesting part of singing with this aulos as well was to think about how he would accompany different sections of my song. So sometimes he would double the melody with at least one of the pipes, or sometimes both. Sometimes he would just hold a drone, sometimes he would play chords.
The philosophy of our production was to follow a scholarly method and follow it all the way to its dramatic conclusion. We had the thought that a scholarly commentary of the kind that many academics write on these plays is often universal in its scope, as a commentator will look at the text, the textual criticism and the history of the manuscript readings, will look at the interpretation in literary terms, will look at the way it must have been staged, we'll look at evidence we have for costumes or the original performance or even for the music in some cases. So in a sense, in a good scholarly commentary, which is as rigorous as possible, marshals all the evidence to make cautious but conclusions that are as firm as possible, given the evidence, in such a scholarly commentary, there is in a sense a dramatic production hiding. And our aim was to take all of that work and bring the dramatic production out of the shell and put it on stage. So to create this music, I worked together with Beth Parker, studying the text of the odes and of the solo sections to write a musical score interacting with the text and seeing how the music can reflect the sense, as well as using these various different musical features that we know were distinctive of Euripides.
So in terms of creating the music, we actually have a fragment of the second chorus of the play with some musical notation on it. And so what we wanted to do was learn from that fragment as much as we could and sort of use that and incorporate what we learned from that in our own composition. So it starts Dromedes o hopteroporo hypotni hadestei.
A crucial part of any music is the structures of pitches, the modes or the scales in which it's composed. Now, fortunately, we know about ancient modes. We have examples of very ancient modes, probably from Euripides' time, and the fragment of Euripidean music that we have matches up with a couple of these. Moreover, we know that these modes had different characters according to the Greeks. We know that they often use the Dorian in tragedy, and that they often use the Mixolydian, which they consider to have a stronger emotional effect in terms of grief or distress, and probably also the Phrygian, and it makes sense for the Phrygian in our play to sing in the Phrygian. We also know that unlike the earliest Greek musicians, by Euripides' day, they liked to switch around between these modes for special effect. We call this modulation. And so we did this in our play. So we switched, for instance, from the Dorian to the Mixolydian in moments of heightened emotional tension. A nice example of the way these different elements come together to compose the music using the different pieces of evidence is the beginning of the first chorus that we wrote. So we have, for this, the description of Dionysius of Halicarnassus about how the pitch of the first few lines stays the same or moves around, and how that disagrees with the pitch accents. So he says the first four notes stay in the same pitch. And also, we have an ancient commentator, anonymous commentator, who tells us that these are written very high up and sung very quiet. So we put them in the higher part of the scale and wrote siga siga leptoniknos arbulas, following Dionysius of Halicarnassus, where his description was relevant. And this means be quiet, be quiet. Put your foot quietly, lightly. And this is very interesting. Usually a chorus enters and sings a song. Euripides, with its element of realism, an element of kind of theatrical cleverness, has made them sing a song, but sing it under their breath, because they can't wake up Orestes. And so the music mimics that. We've put it in the Dorian mode, we've put it high up like the Scholiast says, and then there are some interesting things that go on. Now, we think for various reasons that when you have a corresponding rhythm in two parts of an ode, we call it a strophe and an antistrophe, they match up to each other, that probably you also had a melody that corresponded. It's a bit controversial, but there are several good reasons to think that that was the case. So that's what we did. And we find also that it makes a lot of sense for certain musical aspects to correspond according to the literary sense as well. So there's a wonderful section where the chorus is quietly creeping. and Electra tells them to go away and be quiet. And they say, yes, I'm doing so. Ido is what we wrote. And we wrote it louder and high up again and with an action. And the reason we did so is because Electra says, oh no, be quiet, you'll wake him up. So it looks like the chorus was too enthusiastic. They said, yes, we'll be quiet, but they said so loudly, so that Electra had to tell them to quiet down again. And in the antistrophe, in the corresponding section, again, she says that Orestes is in danger, and they say, oh no, ti perso talas, what are you saying, poor man? And again, she says afterwards, you'll kill him if you wake him up. So it looks like it's the same thing musically going on here. There's a change of tone, it's louder, it's perhaps high, it's too much. And so this piece of literary evidence can really interestingly play into our musical interpretation, along with aspects such as what we call melodic responsion, the melody mapping up, and our use of the different parts of the scale to create a dramatic whole that brings in the music and the text.
Aber probate che sava promo e coitas Syringa sapos broa leptu dona cosa che la pone moi Nai hudos gata che prosita tremasi logona poda se poti creo se molete pote cronio garbe son hot down nuns de die Et imenem ne bracudana stelle Oleseble paracine se subno glugutatan per menoi carin Mokton adico sadica tatare la canna popona note vitri body temi no sare dica se parono loxia se mas materos.
Another thing we were really keen to do to get even closer to the ancient impression of performance is to use masks. Now we know that masks were used in ancient drama from all sorts of sources, and we have some evidence about what these masks might have looked like, especially visual evidence. On Greek vases, they often painted scenes, and sometimes these scenes include actors. And we know they're actors because they have masks painted on. You can see clearly the masks, you can see sometimes even a strap holding the mask on, and sometimes the actors are holding the masks in their hands. Now, looking very closely at these masks, you can see what they look like, more or less. I mean, you can't see exactly how they're constructed on the inside, but you can see they cover the whole face, they have hair on, you can see the sort of expressions they give, the sort of colours, more or less. There aren't many colours in Greek vase paintings, but you can learn many things from looking at these images closely, and you can use those then to go away and construct masks that at least look like these images that we have. We don't know whether they're constructed internally in exactly the same way. In some cases they surely aren't, but this is an important part of giving this impression, getting as close as we can, and marshalling this visual as well as textual evidence to this end. We had a brilliant and very dedicated worker on these called Jacinta Hunter, who herself looked at the ancient depictions and who took all of this research to create masks that would look as close as possible to what we see on the vases. Jacinta came to rehearsals with prototypes of these masks, and we tried them on and saw how they sounded, how they looked.
Putting on the mask on for the first time was quite a surreal experience because firstly you lose a lot of peripheral vision and you lose a bit of hearing as well because it's blocking the ears. And this made acting something sort of quite different to what any of us had experienced. It becomes a much more sort of full body experience because you don't have expressions and changes of expression.
Putting on a mask was a completely new experience for me. It was very interesting and and challenging at the same time. Obviously, I couldn't be using my facial expressions as I would normally do in a play. And at the same time, because the mask captures one particular emotion, it's like having to carry on that dominant emotion throughout the play. But obviously, my character didn't always behave in the same way, and I needed to express different emotions whenever Orestes changed his mind or became more self-confident, and yet the mask always stayed the same. So it was really a challenge between playing with how the character changed in a given circumstance and the dominant emotion that the mask captured.
Because the emotion of that the mask is portraying cannot change physically throughout the play, although the emotion of the character does change, the dramatist has different options. He can just ignore this, or he can bring that out and point to that. And that is what Euripides does at one point in the Orestes, when he has my character Electra say, Gago skutropus ommaton exokoras hosteten ugeduia daxergas mena. When she is trying to trick her cousin Hermione, she has this sort of nefarious plan, and she doesn't want her cousin Hermione to realise this. So she says, I will not change my gloomy expression, as though I don't know anything of what has happened. So he's made this mask almost a disguise for the character's inner feelings there.
In antiquity, masks had various roles. They were clearly a very ancient part of the performance of tragedy, but they also had a practical significance. That is, they usually only had 3 speaking actors on the Athenian stage who would switch masks and play all the principal roles. You have a few silent actors who also wear masks. And that's a crucial aspect of the practicalities of ancient drama. Okay. Is it possible to put the extra staging down on the floor there while you're doing this? We staged the performance at the O'Reilly Theatre of Keble College, Oxford, with a production staff drawn from student volunteers. Our staging was fairly simple, with the intention not to provide too many elements that would distract from the drama or add anachronistic elements to the staging. It's this way and then that way, right?
Left and right.
Fine.
Yeah.
Left and then right. Fine.
Yeah. Authenticity is much debated nowadays, but the aim of this production was simply to get as close as we can to an ancient performance. So we followed a scholarly method, trying to build on research and do our own thinking about the text and its interpretation to lead towards a dramatic performance.
The play was performed for 5 sell-out performances, which was very exciting and rewarding at the same time. We were hoping that the audience would get closer to what the experience of watching a play in 408 BC would have been.
Usiga pesa, tu zgunaki jus gouster xesta krantenta, oltramenta dalomos.
Kai pasio po. Pengos esorante u dot uket helmin, toista lai porois meta.
Sume ma pukten, hali suparge askerostek dekotlemon, ta de paronte akaka.
O meleos hebestes oresta. Kai potmu tanatuta oru, stela krenzon uketi.
Staging the play has also allowed us to make new sense of what other ancient writers have had to say about it. For example, in the second hypothesis, which is an ancient summary of the play, it ends by asking the question, why is Electra by Orestes' feet? And the writer comes up with a solution, which is that she needs to interact with the chorus. So the idea is that you'd have Orestes on the side, Electra by his feet, and then the chorus on the other side, and she interacts with them like that. When we were thinking about how to stage the play, we came up with a different solution, which is that when she cares for Orestes, she helps him sit up and then lie down again and sit up again. And at one point she even asks him, do you want to set your feet on the ground? And another artistic opportunity afforded by having her by his feet is that she can actually move his feet onto the ground as a gesture of sisterly care.
O piltat hos mel prana se supnom peson. Bule tigosu kana kupiso demas.
Labo te tek domorxanatlio, stomato saprode pela non omba tontimon.
Idu. To dulam hedu. Gugan aino mai, I don't pay kiri, terapewin mele.
Putting on this play was a great opportunity for us, I think, to understand not only what makes Euripides unique as a dramatist, but also what makes the Orestes a unique play among the plays of Euripides. And there are all kinds of elements in it which are unusual, whether metrically or having to do with the plot or the characterization. For example, there's the culminating messenger speech at the end. It comes from an actor in the drama, one of the Phrygian slaves who leaps from the palace and in a frenzy sings an absurd virtuoso song in a sort of piled-on poetic style. And it's hard to know what to do with this. In much of the commentary, there's a suggestion that Euripides was joking with all of these baroque elements. Was he winking at the audience? Was he deliberately subverting expectations? I think this goes for the end also, when Apollo comes down from the sky, and in a speech of about 40 lines, he solves the whole thing in one fell swoop. Is this a joke about the Deus Ex Machina? Perhaps. But I think to say that does not take away at all from the power of the god appearing on the stage, and I think that certainly would have been felt by an ancient audience.
Euripides' Orestes is very Euripidean, almost extremely so. It draws to the ultimate end all the innovations and strangenesses and clevernesses of Euripidean style. And this makes it a very exciting play. It also makes it sometimes quite difficult to understand. We have a strange ending, an ending that is not completely alien to the conventions of ancient drama. It has a god that appears at the end, and that happens in Euripides' plays. But here the god appears and utterly reverses the whole course of events as they had been proceeding up to now. We had an expected finish, and it's completely turned around. That is more unusual. And so we have this extreme drama. We have these sudden, wild changes. We have these apparently heroic characters who end up going around murdering women. What do we make of this? Various different interpretations have been offered. It's worth noting that in antiquity, this was perhaps the most popular of all ancient tragedies, certainly of all of Euripides' plays. We know from the number of times it was copied out and found on pieces of papyrus. So one interpretation is that this is simply a great piece of drama, a rattling good play, as Martin West put it. And certainly Euripides has used all these dramatic techniques to heighten the excitement. The question is there something deeper? The great scholar Karl Reinhardt thought that this play was intentionally absurd, that it was a document of the intellectual crisis, as he put it, of late 5th century Athens, where the idea of heroic morality, for instance, that Orestes and Pylades seem to instantiate at the beginning, is becoming simply absurd and empty, and that Euripides wants to dramatize that. That's possible. Is it too much importing our own sensibilities? Perhaps Euripides is simply dramatizing the idea of cleverness, the cleverness of his own skill, and the cleverness of the characters. Cleverness, in fact, synesis in Greek, is a very frequent word in the play and appears to be used programmatically. Orestes says that his cleverness, his own understanding, his knowledge of his own deed, his kind of self-understanding, if you like, his conscience, is what's making him ill. And the Phrygian is said to be saved by his cleverness. Orestes lets the Phrygian go because he's clever. In a sense, he's clever like Orestes himself. So perhaps this is a play about cleverness that gets too far. It turns in on itself and ultimately collapses into absurdity. How should we understand this? Who knows? We should leave it up to you, the audience, to watch and decide for yourselves. Omega semne ke tonemon bioton katekois kai melegois tepanusa.